Israel Update with Gadi and Mike Duran.
Hello and welcome to Tablet's Israel Update. 250 days to the war. It's Shavuot now. It's a Tuesday and it's the 12th of June. Gadi in Tel Aviv and Mike Duran at the Hudson offices in Washington, D.C. How, Mike? Hi, Mike, I mean.
Hello, Gadi. Good morning. I'm in the headquarters.
Yes, you are, indeed. It's been a...
Look at that. Look, it's early in the morning, and look how beautifully bright outside it is.
Usually when we record at this hour, day is not yet breaking, or at least you have some, it looks like it's the break of dawn. So you're late to work this morning, Mike. It's been a very dense week. It began with the amazing freeing of the hostages. I don't know if you saw the pictures. Israelis were overjoyed everywhere. Jews were joyous everywhere. In Tel Aviv, the lifeguards announced it from their megaphones, and you could see beaches erupting in spontaneous happiness. Not everybody was happy. On some circles in Haaretz, I counted only sad stories about the return of the hostages. It's like unbelievable. And one is tempted to think that the whole campaign to topple the government with a hostage deal does incline some people to not be happy if hostages are released without toppling the government. Because what are hostages for papers like Haaretz, if not to do something good for all of us? And then that postponed Benny Gantz's ultimatum. Last time we had a countdown to Benny Gantz's ultimatum. We already...
Yes, we're after the deadline now.
We were cheeky about that last week too, and rightly so, because Benny Gantz couldn't exactly explain to Israelis why it was that he was leaving the government, because he couldn't tell them it was because Blinken is twisting my arm. And then he postponed it in one day and he left the cabinet. And this is not a minor event in Israel, but since the North has began to
What are you
burn...
doing? You're doing the headlines, right? That's my job.
Oh yeah, sorry, and we're not calling them the headlines. I forgot.
No, the roundup. I do the news roundup, and then we talk about it. What are you're coming in here and taking over my role?
Yeah,
Mike, that's the way it is with you Israelis. You give a little bit of territory, and you just take it all.
I want some wiggle room too, Mike. I'm also on this show. You'll have to learn to live with this. So Mike will be telling you the details behind the headlines in this roundup of what happened since we last met.
Okay, so Gadi, since we last talked, you've already hit the two top items here. First of all, last Saturday, Israel carried out the largest hostage rescue operation since the war with Hamas began. It took 4 hostages to safety out of central Gaza, including Noah Argamani, who is in the little the trailer for our podcast here. She's the kind of Asian-looking Israeli. I guess she is actually. I didn't realize her mother is Chinese, and she was. Everyone in the world has seen her because she was whisked away on a motorcycle to Gaza, and so that was remarkable. Of course, a significant number of Palestinians were killed during the hostage rescue, and that also made part of the news. We'll talk about that later. As you mentioned, Benny Gantz resigned on Sunday evening. He was going to resign on Saturday evening, and then he postponed it because of the. I'm sorry to laugh about this, but. As we have been saying, this is all very orchestrated with the United States, and it was designed they had a plan to bring down the government or begin the process of bringing down the government and reactivate all the protests about the hostages, and it's all kind of falling apart. But we'll talk about that. Anyway, he resigned on Sunday evening. In a speech, he is, of course, a centrist opposition leader who joined the government after October 7th for a national emergency government. He gave a speech on Sunday night, and he rehearsed his familiar criticisms of Prime Minister Netanyahu, accusing him of putting personal interest ahead of the national interest, saying that, quote, fateful strategic saying fateful strategic decisions are met with hesitation and procrastination due to political considerations. In a third item, Gadi, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution on Monday, which endorsed the American drafted ceasefire plan for the Gaza Strip. Neither Israel nor Hamas has publicly accepted the plan, but Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in the region on Tuesday holding talks to press for the adoption of the resolution. What's in the plan? It's got 3 phases. The first one is a 6-week ceasefire and a release of hostages who are older or wounded or who are women, in return for the remains of some people who died in Gaza while in captivity. I'm sorry, not in return, as well as the return of remains of some people who died in Gaza. These are Israelis who died in Gaza while in captivity. In return, Palestinian prisoners will be released by Israel from Israeli jails. And then in phase 2, there will be a full withdrawal of Israel's military from Gaza Strip and the return of all hostages and the freeing of more Palestinian prisoners. In phase 3, the bodies of all the remaining hostages who have died will be returned to Israel, and the reconstruction of Gaza will begin. Crucially, this is crucial. You and I will talk about this, Gadi. The ceasefire would be extended after the initial 6 weeks, after the first stage, even if no agreement is reached on the second stage. That wasn't in the resolution, but that's the American policy. It wasn't explicitly in the resolution. Then a fourth item, on Tuesday, Israel's parliament voted to revive a bill that would enable ultra-orthodox men to be drafted into the military. This is a very divisive issue I'm going to ask you about, Gadi, and it has become especially contentious since the war in Gaza began in October. And then in a final item, on Tuesday night, Israel carried out an attack in the southern Lebanese town of Joya, and killing 4 Hezbollah officers, including Talib Abdullah, who's also known as Haj Abu Talib. And he was the commander of the Hezbollah division covering most of southern Lebanon, from the Litani River to the Israeli border, in the western sector. This is the most important sector, the single most important operational sector, and he is the highest-ranking Hezbollah field commander to have been killed so far. In response, Hezbollah launched a massive barrage of rockets and missiles against Israel, probably over 100. And so it's very tense on the northern border right now, and there will likely be an escalation there. Back to you, Gadi.
Yeah. So as promised, a few words about the drafting of the ultra-orthodox. The law that what Parliament voted on was on continuity of legislation, because the law that is now being passed against, that is going to be passed against the objections of the opposition, is actually a law that the opposition prepared in the last Knesset. So they completely turned around on a dime on this. And when this is mentioned to them, they are saying that, well, circumstances have changed. We now need more soldiers because we are in a terrible war, which, by the way, they want to stop immediately. So let me remind you that, in fact, they started the campaign designed to topple the government over the law of the drafting of the ultra-orthodox before the war. It was when the struggle against the judicial reform last year was successful, and the reform was largely defeated. Now it was finally defeated, but it was largely defeated then, that they started switching to another agenda in order to, it's the permanent protest. It's the,
yeah.
It began with COVID, and then it was about the investigations of Netanyahu, and then it was about the trial of Netanyahu, and then it was about judicial reform, and then it reached a peak because they convinced the Israelis that Israeli democracy was in danger, and then it dwindled down during the war, and it shifted to the hostages, and now it's a how would you say it?
I say
Posing,
morphed.
it morphed. That's simple. I should have known. I was thinking of saying transmorfigured, but I wasn't going to gamble on it.
Transmogrified.
You see, I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have. Anyway, this is my weekly English tutorial. And so now this is the issue. And they're saying, well, we need it for the war, but they've been planning to do it before. What is the matter with this? Well, the history of this is strange because originally Ben Gurion agreed to some, I think it was 400 Torah students who are brilliant students and would not be drafted because Toratam Omanutam, their art is their learning. And then it expanded and expanded till now we have a strange situation in which the ultra-Orthodox in general are not drafted. And the excuse is that they are professional Torah students. Now, of course, not all of them are. So they are locked in a strange situation in which their army draft waiver is dependent on their being registered as full-time students, and therefore they cannot work. And this created a very strange anomaly, which, by the way, made Haredi women super women because they have to
do all the work for the family.
they earn the bread, they raise the children, and I think the average Haredi family is 6.5 children or something like that. So it's not an easy task to juggle. I just met a few weeks ago a woman who's not a Haredi, by the way, and she was on a panel in Channel 14. She has a PhD in law and 9 children. So so Israeli religious women are really at the I don't know. It's maybe a different feminist frontier, but the men.
The woman you met you said she's not.
No, she's not ultra-Orthodox, but she's
But she's
there are
Orthodox.
various shades of this, and it became part of the religious culture in Israel. So this created an anomaly, and then compromises were reached in various stages in the parliament. But then the issue began to be adjudicated, and the Supreme Court intervened, as it does in everything in Israel. And the problem is that parliaments are built for compromises, and courts are built for clear-cut solutions. And so they struck down all the compromises. And then came this struggle against the Netanyahu government, and they thought they have him inside the corrals because on the one,
I don't know what a corrals is.
This is what leads animals into, I think, the ring in.
Yeah, we call it the corral, maybe.
The corral, as in okay corral.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think the Spanish is corrales, and this is what we say in Hebrew anyway. But your Spanish tutorial will have to wait for another podcast. And so the trap that they are now springing is basically a tacit understanding between a very progressive Supreme Court and the left-wing opposition, because what they think they can do is they can force Netanyahu to the extended compromises have expired, and so they can force him to legislate. And it'll be damn if you do, damn if you don't, because if the court is speaking in the name of equality. Suddenly, we are told that.
Let me step in here and summarize, and you tell me if I got it right.
But let me finish this because
no, just because I want to make sure I'm not sure that everybody followed what you were saying. Because what the court did is it forced him to legislate to pass legislation to draft the ultra-Orthodox, and they did so with the expectation that his ultra-Orthodox political parties and his coalition partners would oppose that, and it would create a political crisis for the government. Do I have that right?
Yes, you do, except for the fact that the law does not really draft them. So the law is in a series of compromises, and the court is expected to strike it down in the name of equality, which is a strange thing to do because, first of all, we don't have an equality basic law. It's not something that's in our pseudo constitution. And secondly, we are being told always that the court is the remedy for majoritarian politics, and it protects minorities. And now the court is protecting the tyranny of the majority and the ability of the majority to draft the minority.
So what do you expect to have happen here? So what's happened is he revived this old draft law, which is going to have it's going to begin the process of drafting Haredim, but only a certain number of them. And you're expecting the Supreme Court then to knock it down and throw the ball back to him, where he has to come up with he either has to start drafting Haredim in very large numbers, and then there'll be the crisis in his government, or what? What do you think is going to happen here?
Yeah, the last phase of the trap, or what we suspect the last phase of the trap, is that if this topples the government, if the Haredim topple the government, because the court will force Netanyahu to legislate a law that will draft them, then a left-wing government will come to power, and it will give all the concessions to the Haredim. Or as Benny Gantz once said, Benny Gantz once said to the Haredim, here is a page, fill in the 2/3 of the bottom that's empty, and I'll sign whatever you want. So
in other words, you're expecting the Haredim hold the balance in Israeli politics. So whatever coalition comes to power is going to come to power with the ultra-orthodox. And so they're going to use the ultra-orthodox to topple Netanyahu, the left is, but then the left is going to try to come back with the ultra-orthodox. Is that what you're expecting?
Yes, and since the Supreme Court is so transparently political, let me assure you that if Benny Gantz comes back with the same law that the court is probably going to strike down when there's a right-wing coalition, then they will find some excuse.
They'll find a legal principle that will allow them to say it's okay now.
Exactly, because the current principle is equality, but nobody speaks about the Arabs, which are not being drafted. So and nobody in his right mind in the right thinks that we can appeal to the court and say, well, if the principle of equality is the issue here, why don't we draft Arabs into Sherut Leumi, which can be some community service. Nobody's drafting them to the IDF, but at least that they also will have obligations. But of course, this is a rigged game. So it's all political, and the issue is not really drafting Haredim. I just saw some of the data last year. About 4,000 Haredim volunteered to be drafted by the IDF, and 75% of them were turned down. And that's just 4,000. So the IDF has no facilities for that. It didn't request that. The army has no, I don't know, the army should probably be enlarged now, and we might need this manpower in the future. But in the current state, in the current war, the army is not built to draft and train tens of thousands of Haredim.
So, but I'm still grasping to try to figure out what you think is going to happen. Is this going to bring down the government? You're saying it has the potential to.
It has the potential to. I don't think it will. I think it would be very difficult for the Supreme Court to do this in the midst of a war. And furthermore, I think the left is beginning to realize it has climbed so far on the tree of equality that it would find it very hard to climb down and offer the Haredim whatever they want after the election that they dream of. Furthermore, the old guard of Haredim, ultra-Orthodox rabbis, are willing to have a policy that they give their votes to whoever takes care of their sector and don't haggle about anything else. But their constituency has changed, and the Haredim massively vote to the right, and many of them vote to Ben Gvir. Ben Gvir is not ultra-Orthodox. He's a national religious and very extreme to the right. And so the public has become very right-wing. And I don't think it will be as forgiving as it used to be to political maneuvers that include the left.
Okay, so to be watched. We'll see where this thing goes.
We will.
Okay, so let's move on here. And we have to say a few words about Benny Gantz stepping down. It seems like ages ago. It's old news in a way, and you know, this is the way. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper. It didn't. The big. This was supposed to be a big earthquake. I don't think it was an earthquake. My impression is that Benny Gantz's popularity has peaked, and from now on, he's going to start fading. And what do you think?
I agree, and we here predicted this all along. We said that Benny Gantz has gained all his popularity by being or pretending to be a centrist and by putting his shoulder under the stretcher. We use this Israeli metaphor, and people appreciated that he put aside all disagreements and joined the war effort. And his American handlers or some of his unwise strategic advisors thought that somehow it's his magnetic character that gained all these new supporters. And the minute he left the war cabinet without a good explanation, based on this speculative idea that we don't have a good enough plan for the day after, people don't get it. We are in the midst of a war, soldiers are dying. And you could see there were graffitis from Gaza. Someone made a graffiti on a bulldozer saying, Benny Gantz, he was once the commander of the IDF, a commander does not desert a war in the middle, or does not desert his soldiers in the middle, or something to that effect. And his speech was a jumble of empty talk, including suddenly the Haredim. Someone summed it up, said, Benny Gantz's real message is make concession to Hezbollah, make concessions to Hamas, make concessions to everybody else, but draft the Haredim. That is why I'm leaving. And so it all looks like the petty politics that it really is. And while the left is banging on the disingenuous drum that Netanyahu is continuing the war for personal reasons, Israelis know why this war is being continued. They would not forgive petty personal politics, and this is what Benny Gantz did. And so, as the pollsters have noted, I think it was yesterday or the day before, he lost steeply. He lost 30% of his voters. Some went back to Likud. These are people who are angry at Netanyahu but are right-wing, and some went to Avigdor Lieberman. But he couldn't exit the government with all, as you pointed out, with all the.
No, you pointed that out. I just told you pointed that out last time. I just took your.
But you had a brilliant metaphor. It was the Gitonim. How do you call the when you gamble on a gambling table?
Oh, your chips.
The chips, yeah. He thought he could leave the table with all the chips, but the chips stayed on the table.
That's I thought of you when I saw Netanyahu's response to Gantz's speech. It made me laugh because you introduced us to the idea of putting your shoulder under the stretcher, and that's why Gantz was popular, because there's this concept of joining the battle by dropping all your personal considerations and carrying this, being one of the people to carry the stretcher. And Netanyahu used that metaphor in his response. Did you see that?
No, I didn't.
He said, "Now, Benny." He said, "Benny, now is not the time to go into opposition. Now is the time, to continue to shoulder the stretcher."
Yeah, it's the metaphor here in Israel for that. So it's not surprising at all. There were all over Twitter. There were jokes about Benny Gantz. Many of them showed how he says. I think he actually used the metaphor of the stretcher himself. He said at that time you put your shoulder under the stretcher and so forth. But there was a clip of him saying, "With me, Israel above all," and then people laughing. And then there was this kid in a quiz show from 10 years ago. Did you see that?
Right. I did see that. Yeah.
We can't screen it. It's a Hebrew, but I'll translate it for you. It's like this whiz prodigy kid who is 10 years old or 8 years old, I think he was. And he's the youngest guy in a studio. It's a quiz show, and he's very smart. So he's there it's like Jeopardy, for answering questions. And the host asked him what he wants to do. And he said, "I heard you want to be a pilot." He said, "No, I reconsidered. I want to be the chief of staff of all the army. He said, well, why do you want that? He said, because Benny Gantz, the current chief of staff, is no good. The kid
He
said,
doesn't do it. Doesn't do anything.
and the announcer asked him why. He said, well, because he didn't do anything. And then there was a clip of Benny Gantz, I think in a helicopter or in a car, sitting very tightly with Ilana Dayan, the Barbara Walters of Israel. And he said to her, you know how the chief of IDF makes decisions? She said, no. And he said like this. And he shook his head up and down. She said, what do you mean? He said, well, the generals are very professional. They present me with the right plan and I just approve it. And I just say yes. And that tells you everything you want to know about this empty suit that they've been pumping for us. Benny Gantz.
That's funny. That is really funny. President Calvin Coolidge was had this bowling ball metaphor that he believed that the best way to make decisions is to procrastinate and wait. If you do nothing, if there's a problem, if there are three problems coming out at you and you do nothing, two of them will just fall away by themselves. So you really have to you wait until the last minute and then you deal with the one you've got to deal with. And he likened it to a bowling ball going into the gutter. And so when people would bring problems to him, he would say, "Bowling ball." Like, let's just wait. See until
that's the opposite of Kissinger. If you're not on top of it, you will lose control. But before we move to Lebanon, and there's a lot to say about that, just I can't resist my favorite Calvin Coolidge story. Is he used to be bowling ball is exactly the kind of thing he would say because it's just so succinct, and he wasn't a talker. And once in a cocktail party, a woman came up to him and said, "You see my friend there? I made a bet with her that I could make you say 3 words." And he said, "You lost." Yeah, it was actually an effective president.
I actually know nothing about him other than bowling ball.
That's because you didn't study in an American history program, and I did.
But you did, yeah. You're an historian of America. I don't think we ever mentioned that, do we?
Yeah, but you know, I interviewed Batya Unger-Sargon this week for my Hebrew podcast. She speaks Hebrew as good as yours, and that means very good, Mike, with an accent, but very good. And she did her PhD in Berkeley in the first decade of the 10,000, I think, or a little later. And she said it was still possible back then. And what I said is that I did my PhD in the last years of the second millennium. And in my program, there are about 35 students, and the only 2 people willing to say anything good about the United States were myself and a Japanese student who did diplomatic history. All the Americans, all of them, were only able to slander America as racist, colonialist, imperialist, homophobic, misogynist, blah, 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 and all the rest of the...
And they went on to become professors, and now we see on our campuses today what the result is.
Exactly. So, Lebanon.
Okay, Lebanon. So I think this is very interesting what's going on in Lebanon. The Israeli escalation, actually, I mean, if we go back, the killing of Hajj Abu Talib here by the Israelis last night was, I think, a response to Hezbollah hit Haifa day before yesterday, and they hit a boat in the Haifa harbor. It hasn't been, by the way, the Israeli press has been absolutely mute about it. It's one of these things where your censor doesn't talk about it. Yeah, I find it on, Lebanese Telegram channels, that sort of thing. But the Israeli news doesn't talk about it. But the impression I get is that in response to that, Israel they may have given the go ahead anyway. They took out this senior commander, which is quite a big deal. And now Hezbollah is responding with an escalation. Of course, all this is going on just as Blinken is bouncing around the region as well. I think there are 2 ways to interpret this. One is, this is and I think, by the way, and I don't they're going to sound mutually exclusive, but I don't think they are.
Mhm.
The simple way to interpret it is the way I just did, that these are tactical decisions that are being made, and a gradual movement up the escalation ladder as each side responds to the other in this ongoing contest. But there's something else going on as well, and that's the UN resolution. I mean, and Biden's speech on which the UN resolution was based. The Americans are really trying to shut down the war, and the UN resolution is meant to strengthen the hand of the Americans, bring the international community in behind Biden's proposal. So the minute Hamas says yes, boom, the whole international community is going to come down on Israel like a ton of bricks. I mean, what they did with that resolution, let's remember what they did. Biden put enormous pressure on the Israeli government starting on 4 April to make more and more concessions to Hamas and get as close to the Hamas position as possible. The Hamas position is the war has to end permanently. Israel has to withdraw. And the American position has moved very close to the Hamas position, as close as they can get without imposing a ceasefire on the Israelis. The Israelis moved as close as they could to the Americans, but Netanyahu preserves the right to continue the war until Hamas is defeated militarily and politically. So, but the Americans and the Israelis are not on the same page, because the Americans want an end to the whole war now, and that will clearly leave Hamas in power and with military capabilities. Although they don't admit that, the Americans don't admit that, but that's the vision they have. So they got now a UN resolution behind that vision. Biden presented the American position as an Israeli position, which it is not really. And then now they got the UN to endorse, quote unquote, the Netanyahu position. And then once Hamas accepts the ceasefire, they want to impose the Netanyahu position on Netanyahu. Now, when as the Israelis look at this, it's a problem for them. It's a horrible problem for them in Gaza, because they're not going to be able to defeat Hamas if this is imposed on them. But it's a problem for them in the north too, because it means the war will end. The Americans have set it up diplomatically, regionally, so that the minute you have a ceasefire in Gaza, you have a ceasefire in Lebanon. That's what they're pushing for. And so Israel is looking at this and saying, wow, if we still have Hamas in power, and we have all of these people displaced by these attacks by Hezbollah, when this extended ceasefire happens, it's going to look like we were defeated. I mean, in the eyes of our own public, it's going to be demoralizing. It's going to look like we're defeated.
And in the eyes of the Arab public too.
And in the eyes of the world. The eyes
will be Salah Hadin. You will be Salah Hadin.
Yeah, exactly. And so what they're aiming for are they're following the logic of the escalation ladder, in Lebanon, just in terms of what's happening on the ground. But I think both sides, that's Iran, Hezbollah on the one hand, and the Israelis on the other, are also trying to shape the appearance, the context for the ceasefire, so that each one wants a kind of victory image when the ceasefire comes, so that Hezbollah can say, we fought the Israelis to a standstill. We contested territory inside of Israel. We won this. We diminished Israel significantly. And the Israelis want to be able to say to the world and to their public, no, we won this encounter with this round with Hezbollah. Look at we've taken out 340 some odd Hezbollah fighters, including a number of senior leaders, including this guy. That's what I think is going on right now. These are not mutually exclusive interpretations, shaping the appearance of the ceasefire, or just tactical responses to escalations along the border.
Yeah. So the first thing to note is the Hamas has consistently not agreed to any ceasefire proposal that does not include a commitment to end the war from the beginning, and Israel will not. So the deal, if you look at it from the Hamas point of view, if they were us, Mike, if they were animated by purely pragmatic considerations here, reason suggests that they would have accepted the deal now and allowed the war to petter off, because it will be hard for Israel to renew it later, and they could drag the negotiations, release a smaller number of hostages, say that they're on the verge of releasing more, and so it will petter out. That's what one would expect. But on the other hand, the way it is phrased, they need to give up the hostages, and then Israel says it will continue to destroy them. So if they accept this, what leaked from officials in Israel so far unidentified is Israel may agree to this UN resolution and sign onto it because, said the official, it does not contradict Israel's war aims, which are destroying Hamas fully as a military and a governing power, returning all our hostages, and making sure that Gaza never poses a danger to Israel again. So Israel is making clear that this resolution does not mean for us the end of the war, and so Hamas has to sign on to something which includes its destruction, and that is what probably makes it hard for them to sign on. The anti-Netanyahu forces in Israel sense this, and they keep saying, despite what Americans now say, that Hamas is the problem that's sabotaging the deal, they say no, Netanyahu is sabotaging the Netanyahu proposal because he's making clear what should have been constructively ambiguous. They don't say this exactly, but that's what they mean. By every time injecting that our goals have not changed and we will destroy Hamas, he is making it hard for Hamas to sign on. And so this is the logic behind demonstrations against our own government for the return of the hostages. Because if you look at it from afar, or from the bird's eye view, you say the students are going to shut down the student organization, or one of the roof student organizations. I think there are a few of them, are going to shut down universities, or try to shut down universities in a call to our own government to return the hostages. And you look at that and you say, you are protesting against your own government, which is trying to return the hostages, while you should be protesting against, I don't know, the American embassy for not putting pressure on Hamas. Why are you putting pressure on your own government and making life easier for Yahya Sinwar? So of course, the aim of the left is to topple the government. The hostages are the excuse, but the logic of the excuse is that Netanyahu's government is callous about the hostages, and therefore it sabotages the deal by insisting on the eradication of Hamas. Of course, Israeli public is all for the eradication of Hamas, so this is a minority opinion.
My impression, correct me if I'm wrong, my impression is that the resumption of the demonstrations has not been a great success for the left, that the numbers are not great. There's you really just have the diehard leftists there, and their message, as you just suggested, is not really resonating with the rest of the public. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think you do. There are several. There was a video that surfaced this week while the press is inflating the numbers hugely. There was a video of one activist, and you could hear her over. She was like videoing with her phone from a bridge over the Ayalon highway, where they keep blocking the highway for these demonstrators, which is supposed to be illegal, but the police does this for them. And you can see her going over the numbers and say, look, there's no one here. It's terrible. There's no one here. And so you could see Ehud Barak's Twitter account saying, you have to come out today. This is a holiday today. You have to come out because, why? Because of the draft of the ultra-orthodox. So the excuses keep shifting, and the ideology is very simple. Never Bibi, BDS, Bibi derangement syndrome, and they're at it. And the sad thing is that the press has joined them, and these people don't understand that we are in an existential fight. They think, oh, we'll solve the big problem, which is Netanyahu, then the little problem, we'll take care of that later. And here,
it looks to me like that Netanyahu isn't going anywhere for some time.
Yeah, that you changed your mind about that, because we in some of our discussions here, you thought the days were numbered, but all these attacks on Netanyahu, including the Hague, including the court at the Hague, and the American pressure and Benny Gantz leaving, it's people. Netanyahu's numbers have been climbing. They have been climbing. He's now just barely under 50% approval, as opposed to Benny Gantz's 31. It's Netanyahu 47 and Benny Gantz 31. We don't have approval ratings. What we have is the question the pollsters ask is, who do you think is best fit to be prime minister? And Netanyahu is now up from what he was almost before the reform. So all these pressures, Netanyahu has been very smart in banging only one drum, victory, only one drum whenever he talks, and Israelis understand the gravity. And now, Mike, this is
sorry, let me just, before you go on, another thing I thought was funny was, of course, what the slogan that Netanyahu is banging on is total victory.
Yeah.
And Gantz in his speech tried to come up with an alternative, and he latched onto, or his handlers gave him true victory. So what does it mean?
True victory is not fighting the war. Isn't that Sun Tzu? It's your enemy surrendering without fighting the war. So the best form of victory is, but Gantz got it wrong, because he thinks the best form of victory is for us to surrender. So but the real weighty issue now is this escalation in the north going to lead to war before we finish the Gaza campaign. And that is, people here are saying, and that's your field, Mike, so I'm going to hand this over to you, but people are saying, don't be seduced by the Hezbollah trap, because they're trying to lure us into a full war on two fronts. And that can be stretching it more than the IDF has capacity for, let alone that this will bring down American pressure like never before. Because as this podcast has been telling you, our dear listeners, the Americans are trying to save their regional integration policy, the realignment with Iran, as Mike and Tony Badran have termed it. And a war with Hezbollah is just going to bring all their Iran policy and therefore their Middle East policy crashing down.
Well, I thought that all along that there would not be a full-blown war between Israel and Hezbollah, because the Americans would be so against it. And the Israelis would conclude that they already made a decision on the basis of the pressure from the Americans that they need to focus on Gaza first. But look, the Americans' plan was to impose this ceasefire, and I expected at some point Hamas to play along with the Americans more than it has. I don't believe that Hamas has been irrational. I think that the Americans have come so close to Hamas, and they continue to move. You know when you of course saw that the Americans are now floating the idea of doing a separate negotiation with Hamas, separate from the Israelis, to get the American prisoners released. So if you're Hamas and you see the United States moving toward you in this regard, we've got the United States has given Hamas concession after concession after concession. Why not hold out for more? That's their attitude. So the war,
because at one point you're going to have to cash in. So let me suggest an alternative scenario where all this goes terribly wrong for Hamas. And I heard this from Efi Eitam, who, by the way, trashed Benny Gantz for being a hesitant commander.
I don't know who Efi Eitam is.
Efi Eitam is I don't know what the Tataluf. What is it's a very high rank in the army. Uh,
I think is a brigadier general, I think, no?
Something like that. I don't know the American rank, but
Either
you know
colonel or it's either colonel or brigadier general. I get it mixed up myself.
it's a very high ranking officer, but still close enough to the battlefield to be actually in the field. And Effie Tam is considered a very brave and bold soldier. And he said, I grew up with Benny Gantz. We're the same generation, more or less. I was a little bit senior. And wherever there was a real dilemma, he chickened out. And he mentioned a soldier named Madhat Yusuf, who died in the midst of a Palestinian compound while Benny Gantz was the chief of staff, and it didn't come to rescue him because they built on Jibril Rajoub, the head of the Palestinian security services, to do the work for them, and they kept urging Jibril Rajoub to do it instead of doing it. And FBA Tam said, that's not the idea. If you go in and you do it, your soldier is bleeding to death. This guy indeed died. And so he trashed Benny Gantz for this, but he also said, and I was on a panel with him on Channel 14, and he said, and I brought up the American pressure, and I said the American pressure is going to increase exponentially the minute we go for a ground incursion into Lebanon. But he said, and he's not the first one to say, commentator Erez Tadmor also said, he said, look, if Israel gambles and goes to a full-scale war with Hezbollah, there will be rocket barrages like we have never seen on Israeli towns. This is going to be a terrible war like no war Israel had before. And he said, in the midst of that situation, no American president would be able to hold back ammunition or withdraw support. So this is a terrible gamble, of course. But he said, if things get bad enough, it would also constrain an American president. What do you think of that suggestion?
I think there's a lot of truth to it. I mean, it's going to be worse than you described, because if it's a full-blown war against Hezbollah, then Iran is also going to attack directly like it did before. Or let's say we can't rule it out, and any judicious prime minister would have to take this into consideration, that we're going to have very significant barrages from the Houthis. We're going to have barrages from Iran proper and from Lebanon all at the same time. The ones from Lebanon are going to be the most devastating because of geography and and the reaction time that you have. And there are going to be attacks on Israeli population centers that will mean that the United States will have to come in support of Israel in some significant way. But that also puts Israel, it gives the United States a lot more immediate levers of influence over Israel. That this will be very high tempo conflict with Israel going through its ammunition very, very quickly, including the Iron Dome, and especially the Iron Dome ammunition, which is manufactured in the United States. So I think before a prime minister goes for that conflict, there's going to be any prime minister, but before Netanyahu goes for that conflict, he's going to really think long and hard, because it's very, very dangerous. And this is going to be the worst war on the home front that Israel has ever fought. And I'm not sure. Is the Israeli public ready for that? Do they know that? Do they have that vision in their mind? I know that they're eager to win against Hezbollah, but I think that they think, I get the impression that the Israeli public thinks that this is going to be a repeat of 2006, the second Lebanon war.
You're right. I think you're right.
It's not going to be. This is a very different kind of war. I'm sure the prime minister is very much aware of that. He's going to be very hesitant to get into it, and he should be. He absolutely should be. This is a very, very consequential thing, and a lot of people are going to die. So I wouldn't want to predict it one way or the other. I mean, I wouldn't want to say that I think it's certainly not going to happen. But if I have to bet, if you put a gun to my head and I have to put a major bet, I think that before this happens, there might be an escalation on both sides, but I think it will be an escalation to de-escalate. This
And
is
why wouldn't Hezbollah want the war to escalate now?
because if it goes to all-out war, Israel wins.
That's
It's gonna be a it's gonna look at the difference that Nasrallah is obsessed with equations, and he wanted this to be one Israeli soldier for one Hezbollah fighter. The Israelis have shown time and again that they can take out senior Hezbollah commanders, and Hezbollah cannot respond accordingly. It has nothing in its ledger. It doesn't. How many Israelis have died up in the north?
the ratio is 1 to 20, I think, to our favor.
Maybe even more than that. But you've had over 300, 1 to 20 in terms of numbers, but there's in terms of officers, there's nothing like what the Israelis have done to Hezbollah, and that speaks to capability. That the Israelis between 2012 and yesterday, Hezbollah got all this experience in Syria on the ground, which is very, very significant. But the Israelis also made some advances technologically into technical military capabilities in terms of tightening the circle between getting intelligence that there's a threat and then calling in the strike against the threat. And you can see the impact. And when the Israelis want to send a signal, this is the thing that I find most amazing. When I was in Israel back whenever that was, I can't remember, January, was it? Hezbollah shot a drone at Sfat, which was significant because it was beyond the sort of 7-kilometer band from the border in which they were restricting themselves. They broke through they went above the threshold, the escalation threshold that they had been imposing on themselves prior to that. And that happened when I was there let's say it was on a Tuesday. And then on the Wednesday, Israel took out the commander of the drone section of the drone unit from which that drone was shot. So that sends an incredible that sends an incredible message to Nasrallah, because it says, we have the home address of every one of your commanders. We know who they are, and we can strike them at will. I mean, usually you have to wait until you have the shot, right? You have to wait until, and you don't know when you're going to have the shot. It could be a week later, 2 weeks later. They did it the day after. That's an incredible signal. They're not going around advertising this publicly, but if you're Nasrallah, you know that happened. And the same thing with this guy yesterday, with this Hajj Abu Talib. If I'm right that this is a response to the attack on Haifa, then boom, the next day they took out the leadership. So they're sending a message to Hezbollah: don't you dare! If this really goes to a fight and you hit our cities, we'll take out your whole leadership at will. That's a pretty serious message.
One last thing I have to say about this is that the war is going to come at some point. It's clear to Israelis, because those of us who are more politically aware, and this is actually in Israel, interestingly, these are not the elites. The elites are buying American propaganda about the Middle East, but most of us understand that we are at war with Iran, and that Iran has built what Qasem Soleimani has called a ring of fire around Israel, with weapons for which we apparently don't have a full answer. This is, as you and John Casapolo pointed out, I think in one of your articles, or the one about the drones that you published a year back. It was just you?
No, it's the two of us. Overmatch. But we pointed it out a number of times, including in the Gates of Gaza. We pointed it out too.
Yeah. So you've been saying this for a while. They found a relatively low-tech tactic that we have no answer for, and therefore Israelis will have to think in terms of a decade of wars, probably, or something on that order. I don't know how many Israelis are aware that we would have to start taking out many more militias around us, but Hezbollah it's clear to us that we have to take out Hezbollah. And as I've said multiple times on this show, there are now about between 80,000 and 60,000 refugees from the north, internal displaced people. It's not, refugees is not the right term. And they will not return home just because Amos Hochstein gave Israel some paper in the name of Hezbollah. They will just not. So there is a hard limit for any Israeli government, which has to repopulate the north of Israel. We can't have the security buffer zone inside our own country, and we will have to take them out at one point. So if not now, then later, but we all know this is on the agenda. Mike,
I know you're gonna end the show, but let me just quickly say one little thing that's just a little interesting thing about this Iranian technology. There's something interesting that happened over the last week. Hezbollah, by the way, shot down this also might be part of the escalation. I'm sure it is part of the escalation dialogue between the two. But on Monday, I believe it was, they shot down an Israeli Hermes drone. And they said it's the sixth one that they've shot down. I assume Hezbollah isn't exaggerating on that. They tend to be factual when they say these things. But there's a good video of them shooting down the drone. At the same time, the PKK shot down. This is the Kurdish separatists of Turkey who have their headquarters in northern Iraq. They shot down a Turkish drone with Iranian, the same Iranian technology. The Iranians have a drone-killing drone. It's an interesting weapon. It's a loitering munition, so it hangs out in a place looking for a target. But usually when we talk about loitering munition, we're talking about a drone that's a kamikaze drone that wants to strike something on the ground. But this loitering munition of the Iranians hangs out in an area waiting to see a drone, and then it goes and it takes out a drone. And they've also taken out American drones with this thing. So we're seeing,
just to make sure, Mike, everybody knows why this is so crucial, because Iranian weapons are being used against Turkey.
Iranian weapons are being used against Turkey, Israel, and the United States simultaneously. Different theaters and with a different, flag, under a different flag, but all of the data from these attacks and everything learned is going back to one place, that is Tehran. And Tehran has, the Iranians send out technical advisors to all of their proxies who sit there and advise and then collect all of the data, and then it all goes back to the center to improve the systems of Iran. You can be sure that the Turks, the Israelis, and the Americans who work on these issues are all aware of this fact. Whether it's going to have any political impact on the view of the Biden administration or the Turkish government or anybody else, who knows? But it's interesting.
Mike, we are way, way, way over time.
I blame you.
Rightly, but we won't finish off without the dumbest takes on the news or the funniest takes on the news. So why don't you start this time?
Oh, my dumbest take, I have one this week. It's Shelley Yachimovich, the former head of the Israeli Labor Party. She responded when Netanyahu went and he met with the freed hostages, and as you said, everyone was elated. And he met with Noah Argamani, who was this young lady who I said is in our trailer. And it was a very moving scene to see the prime minister sitting with Noah Argamani and her father right next, and he was talking to them. And while he talked to the two of them, he held Noah Argamani's hand, and Shelley Yachimovich accused him of sexual harassment of a woman who's just been traumatized. And I just thought, the Israeli political establishment, the political elite, the Israeli elite cannot drop these fights with Netanyahu for a second, not for a second. There's nothing the guy can do. And I don't say it because I'm a great Netanyahu supporter, although I do have a lot of admiration for him. I really do. But it's not coming from a political source. I look at this stuff and I think, this is so silly. Don't you know you just made yourself look silly by saying that? Nobody looked at that picture and thought that he's a dirty old man trying to, take advantage of this traumatized woman. Nobody except you.
Yeah, she didn't actually say sexual harassment. She said
Oh,
it's
she's
appropriate for
yeah,
an
okay, sorry.
An old man to be holding it cannot be that it's pleasant for her that an old man is holding a young woman's hand for so long after all she's been through. And
I was unfair to her. I exaggerated. She insinuated, suggested that he sexually harassed her. She didn't say he sexually harassed her, but the implication was clear.
Yeah, it was clear. And you could see by the responses under that tweet that people are saying, you are so foolish. And so my mistake is draws on a source for endless mistakes, which is the BBC. And so let's see what this interviewer suggested Israel should have done.
There is concern about the death toll among Palestinians. Do you think Israeli forces anticipated the level of casualties incurred?
Yeah, I think that the whole civilian issue here really needs to be analyzed impartially and understood. According to the reports that I have gotten, and also to the testimonials and even statements made by Hamas spokesperson, the Israeli hostages were held and jailed by Palestinian civilians in a Palestinian civilian area. And as regrettable as any loss of life is, I think that we would have to investigate really who were the people who jailed these Israeli civilians for 8 months. Why did they do it? What was the role of the surrounding community and the hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinians who for sure were aware of the fact that the Israeli hostages were being held in their midst? And why were they complicit with Hamas?
But Jonathan, we don't know that they were necessarily complicit with Hamas. All of the casualties that were incurred, there are reports of women, of children who are among the dead. It is appearing to be a high civilian death toll. Would there have been a warning to those civilians for them to get out on time?
Well, obviously, Israel should have given warning that it was going to do a very secret hush-hush rescue operation in the midst of this neighborhood, and it didn't, and this is why so many people got killed. And then you can see people in the UN and other places saying, well, look at the price. Look at the price. They for 4 hostages, they killed so many Palestinians. To which Israelis responded, next time, don't hold your hostages in the midst of a civil population if you don't want people to get killed, because we saw there were videos of the operation. The operation was extremely complicated, and they were found out in the middle, and they had to do it all under fire, and they did a marvelous jokes. And then there were jokes in Israel saying that, the ratio of terrorists that Hamas wanted released for every hostages was like 1 in 50. And some Israelis pointed out, well, 4 hostages, 200 dead, perfect ratio. Next time, be careful. That's the ratio you demanded.
You have to, but the BBC, I mean, you have to have some sympathy for them. The house in which she was being held captive belonged to the father of a reporter, right? Who had worked for Al Jazeera, among others. He works for some 501c3 nonprofit organization registered in the United States. but I mean, so I think it was out of sympathy for a fellow reporter who was being attacked here.
So let me tell you a short anecdote before we end, because there was a law here called the anti-Al Jazeera law. The Minister of Communication, Dr. Shlomo Kari, shut down Al Jazeera in Israel. And then someone appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court gave a temporary order that we should justify this. And then it was found out that she was held by an Al Jazeera reporter. So the Supreme Court, which intervenes in everything, is suddenly going to protect Al Jazeera from the Minister of Communication, while Al Jazeera is holding hostage Noah Argamani, which everyone, you could also see the difference between how we keep talking about gender equality in the army, but you see all along the difference between the way we are moved by female hostages and male hostages, and understandably, because the horrors are unbelievable for the female hostages, and so you could see that Noah Argamani received the lion's share of the sympathy. No matter what your political opinions are on gender, when you see a girl rescued from these animals who we know what they did on October 7th, you can't but not be.
By the way, Hamas is well aware of that, and when they sent out the hostage-taking teams, they prioritized the women over others.
Horrible.
Prioritize soldiers, but the best thing is women soldiers.
Oh, on that very unhappy note, we will end this long program, and we will be with you again next Tuesday. So thanks for watching, and don't forget to tune in next week.